Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C., naturally inviting you, as always, to keep up with everything at Tarpley.net. On Tarpley.net this week, we had new postings from Press TV, from my Hour on Rent's radio program, and by now I think an article that I've written for Press TV about the two conventions. And why don't we go right into that? Also recommending that you keep up with breaking news on Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. I was also in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, last Friday, a week ago today. That was the Magnate Festival. That was the political tent of a larger festival. A lot of fun. A lot of people angry at the European Central Bank, angry at Mario Draghi, which is fine because I share that. And the whole point of a mass movement in Europe is to seize control of the European Central Bank. Kick out Draghi of Goldman Sachs. Get rid of him. He's in the headlines in the last 24 to 48 hours. And we'll talk about that later on if we get around to it. But now let's do a wrap-up on the two U.S. conventions, which show us, I'm afraid, the dire situation and the moral and intellectual bankruptcy of both of these parties. Let me just say, before we leave Draghi completely, this does bear on the mood of the transatlantic ruling class, the British, the continental European oligarch types, the Bundesbank types, the French finance community, the various Italian reactionaries, Spanish, and so forth. Notice that what Draghi announced yesterday being the 6th of September, because today is the 7th of September, when Draghi made his famous speech, he said, all right, from now on, we of the European Central Bank are willing to support, we're willing to pay for, buy the government bonds of the European countries that need us to support their bonds in the market. And actually, that's the first thing they should have done. They should have done that 3 years ago. They should have made that announcement in 2009, saying, don't bother speculating against these banks, against the bonds of Greece and against Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, and the rest of them. Don't even bother, because we're the European Central Bank, and we are going to positively prop up those prices. We're not going to allow you to drive the prices down so that the lending costs to these countries go up, right? That's a gift to these speculators, to parasites, to looters, and so forth. And indeed, one could have gone further. One could have said, I'd like to warn you out there that if you don't take my warning seriously, you may find yourself in a bear squeeze. In other words, if you insist on speculating against our bonds, maybe someday, some Saturday to Sunday night, I'll announce a massive program of buying up those bonds, and if you're short those bonds, you'll be destroyed. You'll be wiped out. You can go crying for a bailout when I get finished with you. So watch out. That would have gone far to deterring the hedge fund hyenas, zombie banks that were attacking, the various sharks attacking the European convoy. But of course, Draghi, at that time, Monsieur Kitrich didn't do that. So that's all past, though. But what Draghi now says is he wants more austerity. He says there will be draconian austerity conditions attached to these support operations for the European bonds. Now, what this shows us is highly relevant to the U.S., that the international financier ruling class, these parasites, these incompetents, these bloodsuckers, have learned absolutely nothing, and their monomania is still the same. Deadly, genocidal, crushing, brutal, primitive austerity cuts. That's what they want. That's their gospel. That's all they know. It's like a snake. All it knows how to do is to attack and inject venom. It has no other trick in its repertoire. when you get to the current Anglo-American ruling class, that's what they're into. Now, that means here on the other side of the Atlantic, the implications are clear enough. Deadly austerity. Now, let's look at the conventions from this point of view. My reading, and this is a totalization of everything that I've been able to follow about this stuff for the last 2 weeks, is the following, that there are now 2 austerity bids on the table. And these are the austerity bids of the Republicans and the Romney cabal, the Mormon neocon gang around Romney, with Governor Mike Leavitt of Olympic corruption, Mountain Meadows massacre cover-up, polygamy support fame. They have one austerity bid, and then the Obama crew, the Democratic Party, has a competing austerity bid. And here's the way it goes. The Romney and Republican austerity bid, this is fairly broad. I think the Republicans are more united around their program of bone-crushing austerity than the Democrats are, probably at this point. The Republican bid is something like this. They say to Wall Street, give us your money, give us your support, put us into power. We will give you a cut of 25 to 30% in the current U.S. standard of living. U.S. standard of living, of course, already cut by 2/3 since about August 15th, 1971. So over the last 40 years, U.S. standard of living, quality of life, all factored in, down 2/3. Read Surviving the Cataclysm for that. So that's the Republican bid. And this is with the help of the austerity ghoul, John Birch Society, Ayn Rand, proto-fascist Paul Ryan. His widow's peak is a harbinger of death for many if he ever gets his hands on the levers of power, right? A lunatic John Birch Society ideologue. And, of course, when I say John Birch Society, I'm also saying Mormons, because those are the main backers and pushers of the John Birch Society. But just to stick to the austerity, we'll get the Mormons. We'll get to the Mormons later. The Republican bid says we'll give you 25 to 30% cuts. Now, how will they do it? Romney did say more or less what he would do, and I think people generally know. They know it's going to be tax cuts for the rich. It's going to be the continuation of carried interest. Hedge fund hyenas can chalk up their super profits, their looting. They can consider that a capital gain. They can get their management fees reimbursed. They can get all of their loot taxed at a very low 15% rate, whereas a working person would be paying, if we count that as wages, you'd be up to 35% in many cases. So there's more to it, though. Romney in his acceptance speech talked about a 12 million job plan. It's actually interesting to see that they feel required to name a specific number of jobs and 5 points. Where have you heard that? A certain number of jobs and 5 points. I think he's actually got 6 points, but let's go through. He claims he's going to create 12 million jobs. Now, create jobs, when a Republican says create jobs, they mean cut taxes, deregulate, and hope for the best, right? Sit there and wait for something to happen. But we'll get now in the next segment, we'll get to the 5 to 6 points of Romney. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Watch Tarpley.net. We apologize for further delays, but new discoveries sometimes generate delays, and there have been a few concerning this Mormon phenomenon, right? The role of the British East India Company in the support and propagation of Mormonism is the thing that has come to light, and I think worth building in. So watch Tarpley.net. Go there every day, every couple of days, and you'll soon see when the Bishop Romney's tradition, or Bishop Romney's Mormon tradition, is going to be available. It's coming very, very soon, matter of days by now. But now let's go back. The general thesis, the two conventions of the two U.S. Wall Street parties, the reactionary Wall Street Party, the Republicans, and the sort of deception, left cover version, social fascist version, if you want, of the same thing, the Democrats. Now, Romney says he's going to create 12 million jobs. Again, this is sophistry, because Republicans believe that government can't create jobs by hiring. In other words, a government job in their book is not really a job. Of course it is. And if that's not enough, they also basically say you can't do anything as president to really create in a positive way. You can simply create, you can recede, you can cut taxes, you can deregulate, you can get out of the way, as they like to say, and then hope that the wonderful ruling class will decide instead of investing in toxic derivatives that they're going to do plant and equipment. They haven't and they won't. But putting that aside, now what are Romney's points? The first one is more free trade sellouts, more giant sucking sound, more exporting jobs, because free trade is the prerequisite for the runaway shop. In order to outsource jobs overseas, send the factories overseas, fire the U.S. workers, you've got to have no tariffs, right? If you had a modest protective tariff, it wouldn't be possible to send those goods back into the U.S. market. So a protective tariff is absolutely essential. But, of course, Romney wants a free trade sellout, right? A giant sucking sound. So that's his first point. Secondly, he wants energy independence. Now, what this means, coming from somebody like Romney, means primitive, obsolete technology, fracking, things like this. The Democrats have their own obsolete, primitive technology. That's the Don Quixote windmill party and the solar cell party, and then the biomass or whatever, the flatulence party. We'll forget these. Anyway, all of these lead to other considerations. Romney says free trade, number one. Energy, basically fracking and drill, baby, drill. Some of it's okay, but a lot of it is this primitive fracking. Third point, tax cuts for the rich, of course. More largesse for the parasites, the derivatives mongers, the stock jobbers, the speculators, the asset strippers at the top of this oligarchical ship of fools. That's the third point, tax cuts for the rich. Fourth, and this is where Romney begins to get ahead of Obama in some ways, union busting with a vengeance. He's got union busting and busting the teachers' union, in effect, as one of his key points. And Republicans are actually doing this stuff, right? When Mitch Daniels can make Indiana into a union-busting scab state with a right-to-work law, you can see that the Republicans actually have something to put on the table. Obama, naturally somewhat reticent about how openly he can talk about busting the teachers' union. He always says cooperate, but that is, of course, a lethal embrace. So that's the fourth point. Fifth point for Romney, genocidal austerity cuts. Of course, right? If you're going to have tax cuts for the rich, you got to match that with genocidal austerity cuts for others. And the way he wants to do this is he says that he will remove various tax deductions that are now in the federal code, but he won't tell you which one. Now, this is the point that was attacked by Clinton, and I think indeed by Obama. Clinton, with some effect, saying you ask him which of these deductions you're going to get rid of, and Romney says, ask me that after the election. It's fairly clear that they want to remove the tax deduction for mortgage interest. For the Republicans, having people own their own homes is not a value they're willing to do anything. They're not really willing to lift a finger to get that done. And that, of course, means that the tax bill for the middle class, loaded with mortgage debt, will go through the roof. So what he's really proposing there is tax changes that will increase taxes on the middle class, working people, the poor, and others. That's one side of it, right? They'll get rid of the college tuition tax benefits you can get, education credits, so-called lifetime learning credit, hope credit, things like this. And there's the other side of this, of course, is cutting the social services, which are overwhelmingly for the benefit of poor, destitute, or working poor, or working class, or middle class, right? All of that will get the axe. Medicare turns into voucher care, genocide rather openly with Romney Ryan, and they'll also attack Social Security in the way that they've said. Notice with the Romney Ryan, you'd be paying into Medicare all your life until you're 55, and then when you get to be 55, they're going to say, sorry, you don't get anything when you're 65. In other words, the people that have been paying all along are going to get ripped off. Not so good. And Medicaid. Now, Clinton also, in his remarks, points to the fact that the Medicaid budget is key to maintaining any residual assets in the middle class, because this is the nursing home care for elderly people who otherwise couldn't afford it, and they would bankrupt their entire family if it weren't for this. So, and then the sixth point is massive deregulation. And within this, Romney would say, repeal Obamacare because it represents a regulation of insurance companies at the same time that it bails them out. In other words, the deal with Obama was, we'll bail you insurance companies out, we'll save you from your derivatives losses going forward, but at the same time, you're going to have to, do a few little cosmetic changes, sometimes significant from the individual point of view, like no more pre-existing conditions. So this is a Romney program. Now, and you get the idea, right? Take it from there. Let your imagination work a little bit. What would an austerity ghoul of the Romney-Ryan type, an asset stripper, a vulture capitalist, a parasite, a hedge fund hyena, a John Birch Society member like Ryan, an Ayn Rand fascist fanatic, an Austrian, right? All this stuff. With this, right? Free trade sellouts, fracking, and autarky, energy autarky based on fracking, tax cuts for the rich, absolutely, bust unions, especially the teachers' union, genocidal austerity by tax increases for the middle class, and cuts in the social services, social safety net, and deregulation, including rollback of Obamacare. That's pretty much the thing. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Keep up with everything at Tarpley.net. Buy the books you see for sale at Tarpley.net, and go to Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. When things are popping, you can go there generally and get a good intelligence line. So, just to repeat the thesis, the two-party conventions here in the U.S. are essentially two competing austerity bids, with on the one side loot for Wall Street, directly, indirectly, and enforcement. In other words, how do you get this through, and what do you do about possible resistance? What do you do to neutralize blowback? How do you get the American people to go in a docile fashion into that nightmare night? Romney says his method is better, right? This is the direct frontal assault, front-loaded, right? He's basically saying, I'll give you 25 to 30% genocidal austerity in 1 year. And it's really more or less following in the footsteps of Ron Paul, right? The calculation I did, Ron Paul's $1 trillion of cuts in the first year, that's just focused on actual cuts, is about 25, 27, 30%, depending on how you want to count it. Romney's essentially doing the same thing, right? So he's trying to catch up with the super reactionary austerity ghoul Ron Paul, but he's trying to do it as a mainstream candidate. It is amazing how a reactionary like Romney and a John Birch Society crackpot like Ryan are now the mainstream. Anyway, 12 million jobs, he says. That's a pious wish. And the points once again are free market, free trade, sellouts, deals. Number 2, energy policy based on fracking and deregulation, primitive, obsolete technologies preferred. 3rd, generous tax cuts for the super rich, for the 1%, the 1/10 of 1%. Fourth, bust the unions, especially teachers and public sector unions. Fifth point, genocidal austerity through tax changes, removal of deductions, and cuts in Social Security, Medicare, Social Safety Net, Medicaid, so forth. Sixth point, which he actually says 5, but it's really 6. Deregulation, massive deregulation. Anything goes. The Cole Porter Doctrine, and ending Obamacare. Now, the Democratic objection to that would be, oh, no, let me just add before we go to the objections. And Romney could say to Wall Street, look, a lot of that goes right into your pockets. Under my tax cuts for the rich, combined with the rest of this stuff, you'll be able to get money from the government in tax refunds. Because of union busting, you'll be able to lower your costs. Because of my free trade sellouts, you'll be able to offshore most of what you're going to be sending overseas. And so for deregulation, you'll get what you want. The Koch brothers will be happy. And a lot of this money shows up right away on the personal balance sheets of these greedy Wall Street parasites. So there's an attraction for this, right, on the part of a crazed, greed-obsessed ruling elite. Now, the Democratic objection to this would be, yeah, you'll have 6 points, but you'll also have a civil war before too long, right? The Romney plan seems to assume that the American people will lie down and play dead and not fight back. It may be. There certainly are no organizations that right now are in a position to lead this kind of resistance. I am calling, of course, for the formation of national anti-austerity committees and the takeoff, right? There's sort of a hard start to get this going. I showed up on Press TV today, yesterday or this week, with a Occupy spokesman, a veteran from California, and they're as impotent and determined to lose and be irrelevant and to count for nothing as they ever were. They've also learned absolutely nothing. But maybe there are other people that have learned more. But the Republicans seem to think that they can get away with literal murder, genocide against the American people using this kind of an approach, and doing it with an obvious plutocrat, Romney, dripping with money, his wife dripping with money, with horses, with dressage, with 5 homes and 7 overseas tax shelters and a dedicated shell company in Bermuda and his speedboat and his jet skis. This is so heavy-handed. I mean, it's unbelievable. The American people are beaten dogs if they are willing to accept this. And then Ryan, right, this, again, crackpot, John Birch Society ideologue, right, 30, 40 years ago, this would have been a joke. He either would have been a Nazi or a joke. Take your pick, but not actually contending for power. But there it is. So that's essentially the Republican proposal. Now, there's another dimension to it, which we'll get to in a minute. Now, Obama essentially is offering something a little bit less ambitious, but Obama would argue that it's more feasible. Romney is offering, again, 25 to 30% austerity. Obama says, I can give you a guaranteed, safe 10 to 15% reduction in the American standard of living over the next 4 years. And he also more or less said it, right? Romney gave his points. If you know how to translate Republican speak into some human language, you can do what I've just done. Now, in the case of Obama, it's similar. Obama, in this bloodless oration, his acceptance speech, what did Obama say? Well, he says, first of all, he's eager to reach, which I don't think he said grand bargain, but that's what it is. He's eager to reach a grand bargain with the reactionary Republicans. Now, you think of Franklin D. Roosevelt when he tried to get a second term in 1936. at Madison Square Garden, where he says, "They hate me, and I welcome their hatred," and pandemonium in the old Madison Square Garden. A candidate, a fighting class-based candidate, would be eager not to make a deal with the reactionary Republicans, but to wipe them out politically, to throw them out of office, to cut them down to a racist, reactionary regional party in backwaters of the American South. That's what they deserve to be on the line that they're on. But no, Obama is eager to make a deal with them. And you notice, contained in that, a lot of people didn't notice, is he's basically conceding that the Republicans can keep the House, which is not guaranteed. How could it be? 2 months away from the election. A few more scandals, a few more Todd Akins, a couple of throw in a few pages being molested. You could go far with that. And he seems like he's also not really didn't say a word. I need a friendly Senate to work with or any of that. None of that. He's eager to make a deal with the Republicans, a grand bargain based on Simpson Bowles. So this is not a fighting perspective. This is, I'm going to surrender in advance. And, of course, I've been telling you this. Right? This is what he wants to do in December, or it's easier to do in December because you can get the votes of lame ducks who are on their way to Wall Street anyway. He's eager to make a deal. Based on what? He's eager to make a deal based on Simpson Bowles. Simpson Bowles. A gaggle of austerity ghouls, sociopaths, failed Pauls like Al Simpson of Wyoming, somebody who obviously hates people, hates retirees, hates old people, even though he is one. He wants to base it on the austerity ghoul plan of Simpson Bowles. Back in a minute. Continuing with our reading between the lines of the Republican and Democratic conventions. Don't read the printed part. Read between the lines. We've said that it's a bidding war, Republican bid, 25 to 30%, bone-crushing, genocidal austerity, very quickly. Obama now going with a lower offer, but he's also saying his offer has less risk, 10 to 15% reduction in the U.S. standard of living. The way Obama would do it, this would be available for corporate welfare, but to a somewhat narrower group. In other words, you've got to be part of the green jobs boondoggle, the Malthusian Solyndra kind of stuff, right? Can't be modern technology, has to be backward, has to be, Malthusian. So Obama essentially says he's eager, and I thought this was amazing. You'd think that it would be, smothered in a chorus of boos and shoes and dead cats and tomatoes and what have you. But no, he's essentially saying he believes the Republicans will continue to control Congress or most of it, and he's eager to make a deal to sell out his own base, the same poor schmucks that were sitting in that hall applauding him. So eager to make a grand bargain. He didn't say grand bargain, but that's the idea. Eager to make a grand bargain based on the lunatic and reactionary Simpson-Bowles Commission. Now, that guy, Al Simpson, should be far away from public policy. I don't know whether we can put him in jail, but it's likely. I mean, if they took a good hard look at him, they'd find it. You had, the Malthusian bureaucrat Rivlin, Erskine Bowles, a Southern stockbroker associated with Clinton, right? The one of the Wall Street characters that Clinton had, chief of staff of the Clinton White House, and they came up with this austerity plan. Of course, now this is controversial because the austerity ghoul Ryan, the John Birch Society man, the crackpot from Wisconsin, he was on this Simpson-Bowles Commission, and of course he voted against the final result because they dared to touch they really had some sort of cosmetic window dressing in terms of, putting a touch on the rich parasites. No, says Ryan, the rich parasites are absolutely sacrosanct. Not one penny from the rich parasites, hedge fund hyenas, zombie bankers, the ticks, the lampreys of this economy. No, we can't touch them, says Ryan. Right, the goal of all public policy under the reign of Grover Norquist and Ryan is that their looting is sacrosanct, and it's been imbued with a new moral purpose. And then, of course, he turns around and attacks Obama. Obama didn't reject it; he just didn't do anything much with it at that time. Obama, as of last night, has now come pretty close to saying that the basis of negotiation will be the Simpson-Bowles Commission, which is ridiculous because that means that's going to be the starting point, and the finishing point will be at least half the distance, and knowing Obama, 3/4 to 4/5 of the distance to the reactionary proto-fascist Republican point of view. So you can see what he's just given away. And Obama even put a number on it. He says he wants $4 trillion of cuts over the next 10 years. So Obama says $400 billion in cuts over the next every year for the next 10 years. Now, again, you can compare that the most extreme, right, the most epic anti-human point of view was, of course, Ron Paul, right, minus 1 trillion, 1,000 billion in genocidal cuts in 1 year, followed by more, right, to balance the budget, which, of course, you never do because it doesn't work that way. But Obama really says, I think he's assuming that there are already 1 trillion of genocidal cuts built in under the Satan sandwich, right? The sequester that was built into the Satan sandwich of about a year ago means $1 trillion in cuts from Pentagon on the one side, Medicare and social services on the other, and then on top of that, 4 trillion more. Of course, Obama will say that he wants to get revenue enhancements. He wants to have tax cuts on the rich. He wants to roll back the Bush tax cuts. He was not very explicit about that. Well, he did touch on it. Remove the Bush tax cuts for the most wealthy plutocrats. But you can see Obama is now halfway to Ron Paul. Unbelievable on this stuff. So this is the Obama method, and of course Obama's promises are, they're like school uniforms. They're very small bore. He has 1 million jobs in manufacturing. He's got 600,000 jobs in natural gas, 2 million trainees, 100,000 teachers. And of course, when he says 100,000 teachers, he means 100,000 scabs that can be used as strike breakers to take away jobs from existing teachers. So that's really not new teaching jobs. So 1 million manufacturing, 600,000 natural gas, 2 million trainees. He doesn't get anywhere near even the 12 million that Romney pulled out of the air, because Romney simply pulled it out of the air. And even Obama has no specifics on how you're going to get any of this. Now, the way that Obama can do this, Obama would argue, is through his magic, his personality, his charisma. He reasserts hope and change. The hope is in you. America is optimistic, and on and on. What he's really saying to the ruling class is, look, I can do all this with minimal blowback, minimal protest. You saw what I did. Anti-war, impeachment, 9/11, gone as movements. Occupy Wall Street that's more or less Soros, NATO intelligence, ad busters. That's really to help the Obama campaign, the way it was run here, right? Kevin Zeese, obviously, and Van Jones, and quite a few of these people. They saw Occupy as a kind of ideological flanking maneuver to to get people ready not to like Romney. But otherwise, what has there been? In Wisconsin, this was never Obama. Obama was always against it. He wouldn't lift a finger for them, and he sold them out. Wouldn't go there. Obama, Biden, Solis, Holder. None of them ever went. Not a thing, right? Not a fighter for the middle class, right? He promised he'd go on the picket line, and in this case, he never did. So Obama can say, I can do this at least for the next 4 years with the radiance and the magnificence of my charismatic personality. I can just do it, right? Because nobody can oppose me. I'm actually surprised that there weren't ghetto riots already this summer. Looks like the summer is ending, and the ghetto riots have not occurred. And if so, you can chalk that up to Obama, right? That the word went out, Obama doesn't want this, so don't harm Obama. Bit of a surprise. Now, therefore, the summary for Obama is 10 to 15% austerity, but it's more than it seems to be because the costs of enforcing this are much lower than the police state measures. Of course, the Democrats have supported the militarization of police departments, right? Direct repression. The Occupy people made it easy because they never had a programmatic point of view that would have gotten them some support from broader people in the population. They basically said, we're the hippies, we're the petty bourgeois students, we want to do our thing, we want to camp out in the park, have a hippie commune in the park. So therefore it's easy to go and beat them up. And the Democrats were happy to do that as well. So that's where we are. Now there's another dimension on this in just a second, and we'll be back on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, reminding you to keep in touch with the world at Tarpley.net. Announcements on new publications coming soon, and Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. Again, general thesis, Republican and Democratic conventions, Romney, Obama, Romney Republican bid to Wall Street, 25 to 30% immediate austerity, but with some enforcement costs, probably minimum Greek-style social upheaval, possibility of civil war, not too far after that. Obama, 10 to 15% austerity, much less risk, enforcement costs lower. And we just went through it. In the case of Romney, we went through his points. In the case of Obama, it's eager to make a deal with the House reactionaries, eager to make a deal with the John Birch Society, Koch brothers, and of course that's what that was, right? The older generation of the John Birch Society was Ezra Taft Benson, the head of the Mormon Church, Ezra Taft Benson's son, both racists, both hysterical enemies of Martin Luther King, said he was a communist. They were joining hands with the Koch brothers' father, an admirer of Mussolini and a Roosevelt hater. So it all fits together, doesn't it? That's what Obama wants to make a deal with. So eager to make a grand bargain with the reactionary Republicans, basis for negotiation now, Simpson-Bowles austerity plan. And again, they've learned nothing. You can see Greece. You can cut the budget like crazy, and the deficits get bigger, and you're ruining your economy. You're killing people. You're creating suicides. You're wrecking your main asset, which is always the quality of your labor power, your human capital, mental capital. And Obama says $4 trillion in cuts. So it's really $5 trillion because I think he wants to build in what he's already agreed to, which is the Satan sandwich of August of 2011 and the automatic sequestration, perhaps reorganized in some way, but it's got to come out to be $1 trillion. So Obama offering $5 trillion in cuts over 10 years. This is again a giant step towards the most extreme austerity ghoul position, which was that of Ron Paul. So the Republicans and quite a few people in Wall Street would say that's not enough. We demand blood now, not later, not on the installment plan. We don't want the death of 1,000 cuts. We want the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We don't want slow poisoning. We want a flamethrower. Now, the Republican plan for making their stuff work is a little bit more complicated. you notice when you see these television pictures of the parties, the obvious stuff, right? The Republicans are old and white. They are who? They are white men. They are Southerners, especially Southern white men, somewhat fewer Southern white women. They are small business, understood as low-wage sweatshop employers. They're the petty bourgeoisie, right? The nation of shopkeepers, brokers, right? The Tea Party, we always said, real estate, insurance, and other kinds of brokers that are there in the Republican Party. Defense contractors, big oil, and so forth. It serves Wall Street, but the actual groups that they mobilize are pretty much those certain very specific groups, like neocons, anti-Castro Cubans, and so forth. Mormons, obviously, significant part of it. But that's the Republicans. Now, the problem the Republicans have is demographically they're doomed because those groups are shrinking. Within 30 years, we're told, white America will be a minority. For these people, that's a nightmare. Oh, my God, the ethnic composition of the United States, right? Pat Buchanan would say, no, that's not the country that I knew in the 1950s. You notice that what they're always referring to as paradise is the mature New Deal under the relatively benign administration of Eisenhower, who's also building the interstate highway system and the St. Lawrence Seaway and leaving the tax rates pretty much where they were under Roosevelt and Truman. That's what they want to harken back to. But they don't want the policies that produced it, and they're completely blind to the race issue, because this was the flaw of the 1950s. There were a lot of people who were excluded from it and still are. Black America, Hispanics even then, right? Puerto Rican immigrants to New York City, living, 20 in a room in tenements, right? This was already in the 1950s, the world of West Side Story, what have you. So that's what the Republicans want to harken back to. So we've got this. We got now the two bids on the table. The Republican perspective for their own survival. They've developed this over the last couple of years because, given what I've just said, they can't survive demographically because their appeal is that they've now painted themselves into this racist corner. Right? The Tea Party, of course, it was racist. There's no doubt about it. They were motivated by racial resentment, status panic, envy. The obsession is always this. They think we're being taxed so that black people and illegal Hispanic immigrants can live high on the hog, right? That they can, as this is what Romney is appealing directly to it. Romney's ad is, you don't even have to work to get workfare anymore, welfare. You just sign up and they send you a check, right? This is obvious racism. This is a code word, as everybody's known for 30 or 40 years. When you say food stamps, when you say Social Security, you're saying to these white men, and Southern white men in particular, you're being taxed to pay for creature comforts for lazy black and Hispanic welfare recipients. We had an interesting debate this week about welfare. What nobody seems to understand is there is no more welfare. It's gone. There's temporary assistance to needy families, TAMF, which is simply a momentary transition program. But the title of the 1935 Social Security Act, Aid to Mothers with Dependent Children, that was destroyed already by Clinton, as he reminded us in his speech there on Wednesday night. So the Republicans have known that they're demographically doomed, to the extent that they have made themselves more and more racist, reactionary, xenophobic. They're not only racist, but they're xenophobic in the sense that they hate foreigners, and you can see they do. Who do they like? The Israelis, the British. That's about it. The rest of the world, right? 99.9 or thereabouts. They can't stand. So they've done this to themselves, right? Limbaugh and these other people. They've done their work so well that the Republicans are now tied to a shrinking part of the population. They'll never get the black vote is zero for Romney. Not difficult to see why. It's a racist religion. It's a racist church. They say, oh well, we abolished our racism in 1978. Yeah, but your whole institutional momentum, right? The leaders, the quorum of the 12 and the first presidency and the two counselors, they've all spent most of their lives under the racist system. Romney he was happy to encourage people to join the Mormon church for the first 30 years of his life, 31 years, and say, come into my anti-black racist religious organization here. So this is the problem with that. So the Republicans have been aware of this for quite a while. So what do they say? Well, they say we will essentially end the status of the United States as a representative government with a right to vote, a franchise, which is available to just about all adults, right? The Republicans are interested in suppressing voter turnout and preventing people from voting. In other words, it's a way to get, under color of law, you can get to a permanent plutocratic dictatorship using the Republican methods. Democrats would have a much harder time doing this for the obvious reasons. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. So we've gone through the two competing austerity offers. Romney offer minus 25 to 30% on the U.S. standard of living in pretty much 1 year, front-loaded, busting unions, key part of it, destroying the only mass organizations that could resist a totalitarian plutocratic regime. Obviously, Rand Paul joining in on the union busting and even wanting to go even further with the austerity. And then Obama, 10 to 15% austerity cuts, eager to make a grand bargain based on Bowles-Simpson, $4 trillion in additional cuts or revenue enhancement tax increases, and that builds on the $1 trillion built into the sequestering implicit in the Satan sandwich, since the 12 tyrants didn't make a deal. Complicated picture that they've created for us. The problem with the Republican one is that a certain amount of backlash, right, riots, maybe civil war might emerge. Obama says he can do it with his radiant personality. The Republicans, however, have already got something going to deal with the fact that they're demographically doomed because they've tied themselves to shrinking parts of the U.S. population. They've assumed a racist, xenophobic, anti-Hispanic, and related, right, anti-Middle East, I'm sure, anti-Far East, well, if they have money, it's okay, posture. This means the Republicans are demographically doomed. The Republicans may even think that if they don't steal this election, they may be finished, right? Maybe in 4 years, given the demographic trends, the Republican base will be eroded by the Grim Reaper, and then since they've really taken this irreversible racist and xenophobic stance, that they'll never get back into power. So for the Republicans, there's a huge urgency to get into power now and begin to limit the right to vote, so that you have some hope of being able to hang on in the future. And the thing that they're concerned about with Obamacare is not what they say. They don't want people to think that they have a right to health care. They don't want the idea of economic rights. This is what they're most afraid of. The Franklin D. Roosevelt Economic Bill of Rights of January 1944, where you have 6 or 7 or 8 economic rights that are your constitutional human rights. Had that recognized. This would be death for the Republican Party. They'd become extinct. So the Republicans say, here's what we'll do. We'll make it harder and harder for these people to vote. Remember, when people get poor, right, if they're unemployed, if they've been foreclosed on, if they've gone through this buffeting, they become apathetic, they become resigned, they're much less likely to vote. So if you drive people into poverty, that's kind of a vote suppression right there. Statistically, it's been shown. Poor people vote less. Well-to-do people vote more. Old people vote more, but if they're poverty-stricken, then they vote less. So that's also a part of it. Now, they would also say, let's have exorbitant identification requirements. Let's find ways to make it harder and harder for you to prove who you are and continue voting. Let's make it so that you have to buy things that are expensive, that you have to go where it's far away, that you have to go through something humiliating, and on and on and on. This is the various state plans. 11 reactionary states have put this stuff through. So that's one thing you can do. Florida, right? We know this from the Bush years. You purge the voter registration rolls. You find some company that's willing to do this as a scam, and you simply, erase a lot of names. You delete names from the voter rolls, and when you then show up to vote, you can't vote provisional ballot, but you've still got to come back within a very few days or hours with all the ID. A lot of people can't do it. They've already taken one day off to vote or half a day off to vote. They can't do it again. So you're suppressing this stuff. A lot of these plans come from ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council. Koch provides the money. John Birch Society, pro-Mussolini in the previous generation. If there's early voting, this is the Ohio one. Since working people have a hard time voting on a Tuesday, if they can vote on Saturday, if they can vote on Sunday, makes it much easier. Black churches traditionally get led by the minister to go and vote on the Sunday right after the services. Make that impossible, say the fascists out there in Ohio. You can harass voters in some other ways, too, but you get the idea. So the Republicans say, we will limit the franchise, right? We'll go to, in Prussia, right, under the Prussian Constitution, you had the famous three-class elections, right, that there were three categories in the parliament. Hard to get that at here, the so-called Dreiklassenwahlrecht, but you get the idea, right? Make it harder and harder. And then you've got plenty of cops, and you're going to be demoralizing people. And then, of course, money, Citizens United, right? You've got a bunch of fascist judges, the Rats Cabal, Robert Alito, Thomas and Scalia. They will really, they're in the process of striking down any barrier. Pretty soon you'll have any corporation will be able to give money directly to candidates. No more limits, sky's the limit, Cole Porter doctrine, anything goes. So the Republicans say using police-state methods, depriving people of the right to vote, harassing voters, demoralizing them with poverty, buying elections, snowing them under with cash, we can control. And they really feel an urgency that they've got to get in now, because 4 years from now may already be too late for them. And this is what Romney's supposed to put through. It's no coincidence that Romney comes from the church that's got this racist theology. And, of course, the Republicans had Mia Love, a token black mayor of Salt Lake City, right? She's there as a black woman with ancestors from Haiti to show, oh, no, what you've been told about the Mormons is not true. Well, it is true, and this is called tokenism, camouflage, what have you. So that, I think, is the package. So those are the two competing bids. Again, with Obama, the money doesn't necessarily go in increased amounts to the Wall Street hedge fund hyenas, but it is available as corporate welfare, especially if you're in the green scam, and it's also available as the future bailouts. Right? He'd be happy to save them again. Of course, he would. So I think those are essentially the two offers. Now, again, I conclude that the ruling class finds the Romney offer more attractive. How do we know? First of all, money. Wall Street is giving more money to Romney now. This has changed, but it has changed over the last couple of months. And secondly, the Federal Reserve has not done any hot money operations, QE3, whatever it is. They haven't done that in any way that would help Obama, so they voted against him. And Obama, welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So again, the indications that the transatlantic ruling class is supporting Romney, clear enough, he's the one who made the secret visit to Bilderberg, but unmistakably more Wall Street money now going to Romney, and Bernanke, Federal Reserve, always talking about quantitative easing, talking about doing something at the next meeting and so forth. But the time for helping Obama is over. And, half a $1 trillion of hot money would have created a bit of an uptick. All you need really to convince people for a couple of months that the recovery is there. But they didn't do that. And that indicates where they're headed. So I would also urge people, beware when you see people now that have all of a sudden discovered anew how horrible Obama is. Watch out, they may be working for Romney. And Romney really means the CIA, right? Because remember, the Mormon mafia, right? There's a Mormon mafia in the CIA. There's a Mormon mafia in the FBI. We just had, a couple of years ago, 300 Hispanic FBI agents won a lawsuit against something they called the Mormon Mafia for job discrimination, pay discrimination, and related stuff against them. So there's a Mormon Mafia. Brent Scowcroft was sort of the right-hand man of Kissinger. He did a lot of the personnel stuff with Kissinger. Remember, whenever there was a job opening, Kissinger was always there with the candidate in the State Department, the intelligence community. Scowcroft was actually doing that. So there are a whole bunch of people that are either Mormons or dough faces for Mormons, in other words, tools of Mormons, satellites of Mormons, people in the tradition of this guy, Kane, from Pennsylvania, who helped Brigham Young cover up for the Mountain Meadows Massacre back in the 1870s and the 1880s. Now, let's just give some examples of this. Let's take LaRouche, right? When you're talking about CIA disinformation, LaRouche is always a great place to look. And what we have now is this new video that's been posted on quite a few places on the Internet about non-survivability or non-survivable or something like this. And it's sort of the day after. It's some, the night of the Auk existential presentation of the dangers of nuclear war. A lot of the stuff is true enough, right? That there is the strategic pivot by the entire Anglo-American aggressor community against China in the Far East, against Russia. But this is completely personalized to Obama. In other words, it's all Obama's work. This is quite fantastic. Romney is completely left out of the picture. So this is a campaign document. This is LaRouche supporting Romney. That's what it is. And is that a good idea? Notice, when LaRouche could have done something to stop Obama, he didn't lift a finger. I put out 2 books, one in April 2008, before the key Ohio and Pennsylvania primaries, and another book in August, before the Democratic Convention. And I raised the issue of Obama's birth certificate, because it's clear this is how he could be blackmailed. This is how he has been and is blackmailed, of course. But LaRouche in those days was saying, Obama's life is in danger. The British are determined to get rid of wonderful Obama. And then, of course, once Obama got into power, LaRouche discovered all of a sudden that he was the new Hitler. Now, this is a very, very transparent kind of disinformation campaign. So I would say, if you're going to look at that nuclear war thing, notice that the idea is that Obama personally seems to embody all of these dangers. And then, we've got LaRouche there on the one side, and then Glenn Beck on the other. Glenn Beck. I think it indicates already how sensitive the saints are to exposés concerning them. And this is just now in the last day or two. We have Glenn Beck. You'll remember him, right? He used to be on Fox News, but he was too crazy for them, right? He was just too weird. And he's got his own television program, and this is, what's it called? Blaze TV. Operation Trailblazer? I don't know. Blaze TV with Glenn Beck. So yesterday, I believe, yesterday being September 6th, Glenn Beck devoted a full hour to the question, does Mitt Romney's Mormonism make him too scary or weird to be elected president of the United States. And therefore, it became Ask Glenn Beck, convert to Mormonism, about Romney. So it's open apologetics. I would also remember, you can look on the internet, you can find a tape of Joel Skousen, who, with a straight face, admirable gift, Joel Skousen gets on there and says, Romney is not part of the establishment. He's not part of the establishment. The establishment fears Romney. They don't like him because they'd have to discipline him and lean on him if he ever became president. Now, this is, of course, absolutely fantastic, but the Mormon Joel Skousen is doing yeoman service for the Mormon oligarch Romney. Now, in case of Glenn Beck, let's just see if we can go back and reconstruct some of the stuff that he says. He pretends that he's not familiar with Warren Jeffs. He calls him Warren Jeffers. I guess the two or three main issues. Polygamy. Well, says Glenn Beck, he dodges this as long as he can, but then he says they did practice polygamy, but 122 years ago, polygamy stopped. Well, why did they have polygamy? Well, people died for the Book of Mormon. Polygamy is biblical, and this is what Milton also argued. All kinds of stuff is biblical, right? You can go back there and find some pretty grisly, hair-raising stuff. But the main thing is victimhood, right? The Mormons want to be portrayed as victims. They're not aggressive. They're not theocratic. They don't have armed Danites. They don't have stealing and rustling and land grabs. They don't have block voting. They don't have, attempts to seize power, the White Horse Prophecy. No, they're just a bunch of victims subjected to massive persecution. And he says, Mormons were the conservative talk show hosts of the time, and the government was American Airlines. This is Glenn Beck portraying himself as a victim. And then he shows you this infamous extermination order. The idea being that the controllers of Mormondom, and my argument is those controllers are in London and associated with London, they've got to use the Mormons to create chaos and conflict to get a civil war going or to contribute to that process in the U.S. So they somehow, for some reason, Missouri becomes the most important, right? The border questions, right? The issues of the Missouri Compromise, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and all of that. Missouri is the last place you'd want to go if you didn't want conflict with your neighbors, right? If you wanted to be tolerated, you might try Wisconsin or Minnesota or someplace, the Dakotas, whatever. But no, you got to go to Missouri because it's full of these border ruffians who are pro-slavery, and they're armed and they're in your face. And then you go in there as the saints, and the saints say to the border ruffians, guess what? We're going to expropriate you soon, and right now we'll do some on the installment plan by looting your cattle and so forth. So then the border ruffian proto-Confederate governor of Missouri writes Executive Order 44, the extermination order. This is a scenario, right? This is the destabilization of the United States. Now, it's a tragedy, but that's a proto-Confederate. So you got basically two British pawns fighting each other to rock the boat in the U.S. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. The time has gone by. Let's see how much more we can get in here about Glenn Beck. We just had LaRouche, essentially an oblique disinformation move. Obama incarnates the danger of nuclear war. But, of course, Romney, with all those neocons, right, bigger warmongers, Romney, who says Russia is the main enemy, says this openly. That's ignored. Very, very strange. Glenn Beck, I think, responding to perhaps even to some of the things we've been doing here on this program and elsewhere, and other people have been joining in. Glenn Beck wants to give you 1 hour about all those terrible myths about Mormondom and how Mitt Romney should be president, of course. Playing this card of victimhood. Polygamy. Why was there Mormon polygamy? He says, only in response to the fact that so many of the men were killed. The Mormon men were being killed by religious persecution, by mobocrats, I guess they would have said, because they were getting killed and they wanted to repopulate, keep Mormondom going. So therefore they said, let's have polygamy. It began with the persecution and it ended when the persecution ended. The problem with that is it's baloney. The polygamy began with Joseph Smith in particular in the 1830s, early 1830s. We don't know how early. And of course, they lied about it for quite a while, and they kept going. And even after 1890, we have Miles P. Romney down there in Mexico having another polygamous marriage after the 1890 revelation that polygamy was supposed to come to an end. And we're told that the Mormons flee the United States. They go into what is technically Mexico, in reality a kind of no man's land, but they're still devoted to the country that they served. Poor, ignorant Glenn Beck thinks that the Mexican War was the Spanish-American War. He refers to something real, a Mormon brigade that was sent in to the Mexican War. This was because the pro-slavery party was the one supporting the Mexican War at that time. But then, of course, in 1890, the curtain came down and polygamy came to a rapid end. Of course, it was much messier because there are a lot of women, families, all kinds of stuff. So basically, it's a lie. What this depends on with Glenn Beck, the lie is that there was no polygamy until 1852 when Brigham Young proclaimed the Order of Jacob, plural marriage, spiritual wives, polygamy, and then it ended in 1890. So it only went on for those 38 years. But again, it was there before and it was there after, and it's going to be again in heaven. And there are these pesky rumors that especially at the top, people have their wives on different continents in different cities. God knows what the truth of this is. And he says only 5% of Mormons ever practiced polygamy. Now, this is again baloney. Under Brigham Young, especially in southern Utah, there were lots and lots of poor farmers with 5 to 6 wives. They became the field hands. He became the overseer, and it duplicated the principal structure of slavery. Then he needs to talk to you about coffee and tea and alcohol, that Mormons live longer. Well, the Mormon underwear, the magic the underwear, the temple garments, magic knickers, what have you. He says they're T-shirt, boxer shorts for men and women. They are oppressive because they're so hot in hot climates. For women, it's hard because really fashionable clothing are incompatible. That's incompatible with these magic underpants. He says it's hurtful to have that mark. This is the fire-eating Glenn Beck who insults people, character assassin left and right. But suddenly the underwear it's hurtful to make fun of it. Now, why don't you show us your underwear there, Glenn? Can't show us because it's festooned with pagan, Freemasonic symbols, hex signs, God knows what, right? You don't know what you'd find down there. Think of symbols. Oh, my God. Let your imagination work. So you're not allowed to see it. Why not show us a pair of these things? No, it's a secret. Inside of the temple is a secret. Mormons live longer, 5 to 8 years longer, because of clean living. He apparently said some things about temple rituals. This would have been interesting, right? The so-called temple endowment, the liturgy or rituals. This has been removed, and that's where we want to know what's with the oath of vengeance and what's with the oath of obedience that would make Romney, technically speaking, if Romney really wants to become a god, have a celestial harem, and rule over his planet, as he thinks that his father George has already done, then he has to obey this guy Monson, thought to be suffering from dementia at this point. There's an interesting perspective. If Romney has to do what Monson says, and according to the Mormon Curtain and other websites, Monson is suffering from dementia, does that mean that you're putting an Alzheimer's victim into a position of power in the U.S. government? I think those are the main the main things. But again, the extraordinary sensibility and always the desire to portray oneself in the light of victimhood. Now, the life of George Romney, some interesting new things about this. George Romney, the way he tried to say it is that the family the family fled to Mexico after polygamy had ended. This is baloney. The family fled with Miles Park Romney. They fled well before the ending of polygamy, and they stayed after. Remember, this is George Romney complains that in 1907, the Mexican, I think it's 1907, the Mexican Revolution chased the Mormons out of Colonia Juarez in Mexico. This is a polygamous colony, right? There are also polygamous Mormon colonies in Mexico. George Romney, the father of the current candidate, right? This is now George, the former governor of Michigan, secretary of in the cabinet for Nixon. George Romney says that his family are prominent victims, right? The Romney Pratt family are, quote, the first displaced persons of the 20th century. The first? How about the Boer War? How about the Italian-Turkish war, mainly fought in Libya? This very, very narrow, right? And with a very, very acute concern with one's own sufferings, real or imagined, and a complete blindness to anybody else's. Think about that. A regime with so many Mormons running the economic policy, very much concerned with the problems of Mormons, but not so much with the others. Notice that night in the Republican convention, when the people who came forward, the husband and wife who talked about Romney befriending their son, those were Mormons, and he did it as part of the Mormon sort of in-group services. And one also has to wonder, did those people really have a choice? Did they get an order from their bishop or from their stake president or from Salt Lake City saying, guess what, you're going to appear and you're going to talk about our guy Mitt? So here's then what George Romney says. The Great Mexican Revolution, which certainly has many positive features, George Romney said, I was kicked out of Mexico when I was 5 years old. This must be 1912, actually. I was kicked out of Mexico when I was 5 years old because the Mexicans were envious of the fact that my people, Mormons, became prosperous, Mormon polygamists, actually. Kicked out of Mexico when I was 5 years old because the Mexicans were envious of the fact that my people became prosperous. And then he says the Mexicans thought that if they could just take it away from the Mormon settlers, it would be paradise. And, of course, it just didn't work that way, of course. Now, this is essentially the politics of envy. This is the main line of the Romney campaign, that if you're not content to have this tremendous wealth disparity in favor of these people, that you're practicing the politics of envy. Anyway, the other thing that I would just stress is the new stuff that's coming to light. The intelligence department of the British East India Company is James Mill, succeeded by John Stuart Mill, and one of his projects is Thomas Carlyle. Thomas Carlyle, a fascist. These two, James Mill John Stuart Mill in On Liberty, defends the Mormons. Carlyle, unpublished essay, which I've unearthed, also defends Brigham Young. The model of theocratic dictatorship is what the world needs. And, of course, Carlyle is one of the main photo-fascists. The two U.S. Wall Street parties, the reactionary Wall Street Party, the Republicans, and the sort of deception, left cover version, social fascist version, if you want, of the same thing, the Democrats. Now, Romney says he's going to create 12 million jobs. Again, this is sophistry because Republicans believe that government can't create jobs. Can't create jobs by hiring. In other words, a government job in their book is not really a job. Of course it is. And if that's not enough, they also basically say you can't do anything as president to really create in a positive way. You can simply create, you can reseed, you can You can cut taxes, you can deregulate, you can get out of the way, as they like to say, and then hope that the wonderful ruling class will decide, instead of investing in toxic derivatives, that they're going to do plant and equipment. They haven't and they won't. But putting that aside, now what are Romney's points? The first one is more free trade sellouts, more giant sucking sound, more exporting jobs, because free trade is the prerequisite for the runaway shop. In order to outsource jobs overseas, send the factories overseas, fire the U.S. workers, you've got to have no tariffs, right? If you had a modest protective tariff, it wouldn't be possible to send those goods back into the U.S. market. So a protective tariff is absolutely essential. But, of course, Romney wants a free trade sellout, right? A giant sucking sound. So that's his first point. Secondly, he wants energy independence. Now, what this means, coming from somebody like Romney, means primitive, obsolete technology, fracking, things like this. The Democrats have their own obsolete, primitive technology. That's the Don Quixote windmill party and the solar cell party, and then the biomass or whatever, the flatulence party. We'll forget these. Anyway, all of these lead to other considerations. Romney says free trade, number one. Energy, basically fracking and drill, baby, drill. Some of it's okay, but a lot of it is this primitive fracking. Third point, tax cuts for the rich, of course. More largesse for the parasites of the John Birch Society. But just to stick to the austerity, we'll get the Mormons. We'll get to the Mormons later. The Republican bid says we'll give you 25 to 30% cuts. Now, how will they do it? Romney did say more or less what he would do, and I think people generally know. They know it's going to be tax cuts for the rich. It's going to be the continuation of carried interest. Hedge fund hyenas can chalk up their super profits, their looting. They can consider that a capital gain. They can get their management fees reimbursed. They can get all of their loot taxed at a very low 15% rate, whereas a working person would be paying, well, if we count that as wages, you'd be up to 35% in many cases. So there's more to it, though. Romney in his acceptance speech talked about a 12 million job plan. It's actually interesting to see that they feel required to name a specific number of jobs and 5 points. Where have you heard that? A certain number of jobs and 5 points. I think he's actually got 6 points, but let's go through. He claims he's going to create 12 million jobs. Now, create jobs, when a Republican says create jobs, they mean cut taxes, deregulate, and hope for the best, right? Sit there and wait for something to happen. But we'll get now to in the next segment, we'll get to the 5 to 6 points of Romney. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Watch Tarpley.net. We apologize for further delays, but new discoveries sometimes generate delays, and there have been a few concerning this Mormon phenomenon, right? The role of the British East India Company in the support and propagation of Mormonism is the thing that has come to light, and I think worth building in. So watch Tarpley.net. Go there every day, every couple of days, and you'll soon see when the Bishop Romney's tradition, or Bishop Romney's Mormon tradition, is going to be available. It's coming very, very soon, matter of days by now. But now let's go back. The general thesis, the two conventions of... Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C., naturally inviting you, as always, to keep up with everything at Tarpley.net. On Tarpley.net this week, we had new postings from Press TV, from my Hour on Rent's radio program, and by now I think an article that I've written for Press TV about the two conventions. And why don't we go right into that? Also recommending that you keep up with breaking news on Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. I was also in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, last Friday, a week ago today. That was the Magnate Festival. That was the political tent of a larger festival. A lot of fun. A lot of people angry at the European Central Bank, angry at Mario Draghi, which is fine because I share that. And the whole point of a mass movement in Europe is to seize control of the European Central Bank. Kick out Draghi of Goldman Sachs. Get rid of him. He's in the headlines in the last 24 to 48 hours. And we'll talk about that later on if we get around to it. But now let's do a wrap-up on the two U.S. conventions, which show us, I'm afraid, the dire situation and the moral and intellectual bankruptcy of both of these parties. Let me just say, before we leave Draghi completely, this does bear on the mood of the transatlantic ruling class, the British, the continental European oligarch types, the Bundesbank types, the French finance community, the various Italian reactionaries, Spanish, and so forth. Notice that what Draghi announced yesterday being the 6th of September, because today is the 7th of September, when Draghi made his famous speech, he said, all right, from now on, we of the European Central Bank are willing to support, we're willing to pay for, buy the government bonds of the European countries, current Anglo-American ruling class. That's what they're into. Now, that means here on the other side of the Atlantic, the implications are clear enough. Deadly austerity. Now, let's look at the conventions from this point of view. My reading, and this is a totalization of everything that I've been able to follow about this stuff for the last 2 weeks, is the following, that there are now two austerity bids on the table. And these are the austerity bids of the Republicans and the Romney cabal, the Mormon neocon gang around Romney, with Governor Mike Leavitt of Olympic corruption, Mountain Meadows massacre, cover-up, polygamy support fame. They have one austerity bid, and then the Obama crew, the Democratic Party, has a competing austerity bid. And here's the way it goes. The Romney and Republican austerity bid, this is fairly broad. I think the Republicans are more united around their program of bone-crushing austerity than the Democrats are probably at this point. The Republican bid is something like this. They say to Wall Street, give us your money, give us your support, put us into power. We will give you a cut of 25 to 30% in the current U.S. standard of living. U.S. standard of living, of course, already cut by 2/3 since about August 15th, 1971. So over the last 40 years, U.S. standard of living, quality of life, all factored in, down 2/3. Read Surviving the Cataclysm for that. So that's the Republican bid. And this is with the help of the austerity ghoul, John Birch Society, Ayn Rand, proto-fascist Paul Ryan. His widow's peak is a harbinger of death for many if he ever gets his hands on the levers of power, right? A lunatic John Birch Society ideologue. And, of course, when I say John Birch Society, I'm also saying Mormons, because those are the main backers and push that need us to support their bonds in the market. And actually, that's the first thing they should have done. They should have done that 3 years ago. They should have made that announcement in 2009, saying, don't bother speculating against these banks, against the bonds of Greece and against Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, and the rest of them. Don't even bother, because we're the European Central Bank, and we are going to positively prop up those prices. We're not going to allow you to drive the prices down so that the lending costs to these countries go up, right? That's a gift to these speculators, to parasites, to looters, and so forth. And indeed, one could have gone further. One could have said, I'd like to warn you out there that if you don't take my warning seriously, you may find yourself in a bear squeeze. In other words, if you insist on speculating against our bonds, maybe someday, some Saturday to Sunday night, I'll announce a massive program of buying up those bonds, and if you're short those bonds, you'll be destroyed. You'll be wiped out. You can go crying for a bailout when I get finished with you. So watch out. That would have gone far to deterring the hedge fund hyenas, zombie banks that were attacking, the various sharks attacking the European convoy. But of course, Draghi, at that time, Monsieur Kitriche didn't do that. So that's all past, though. But what Draghi now says is he wants more austerity. He says there will be draconian austerity conditions attached to these support operations for the European bonds. Now, what this shows us is highly relevant to the U.S., that the international financier ruling class, these parasites, these incompetents, these bloodsuckers, have learned absolutely nothing, and their monomania is still the same. Deadly, genocidal, crushing, brutal, primitive austerity cuts. That's what they want. That's their gospel. That's all they know. It's like a snake. All it knows how to do is to attack and inject venom. It has no other trick in its repertoire. When you get to the